Hello and welcome back to this episode of the podcast. And I'm so happy you're joining me today because I'm going to dive into something that I know a lot of us struggle with, including me, and that is the feeling like you are cursed. I was recently in a session with a client and we were kind of looking at her past and really drawing a lot of wisdom and knowledge and context for her present and her future from that. And in the guidance, these words fell out of my mouth. And at the time I was like, oh, those are good words. We need to remember those. But I never remember what I'm channeling in a reading. So I actually had to contact her and ask her what this slogan was because it built a foundation of so much empowerment for her. And I think it can do the same thing for all of us. And so with her permission, I am sharing this. Obviously not any of her personal details, but just this guidance, this particular guidance that came through. And the words were, "You are not cursed, you are rehearsed." And so many of us struggle with this. I feel like we feel sometimes we're cursed because we're simply like repeating patterns. That is it. Rehearsing certain behaviors and thought processes over and over again. And it's so easy to feel like things keep happening to us. And maybe it's that like you always seem to attract really toxic relationships or you're constantly struggling with money or you just can't seem to break free from procrastination. And over time, it starts to feel like a curse, like something that's just happening to you. But what if it's not fate? What if it's something that you've just learnt over time, which you can at any time unlearn? So today we're going to break down this idea of rehearsed behavior, and I'll share some practical ways that we can perhaps start exploring a shift out of these old patterns, because the truth is you are absolutely not cursed. You're simply rehearsing old scripts that do not serve you anymore. So let's get into it. So first of all, let's talk about what I mean by rehearsed behavior. So imagine like you're in a play and the first time you read a script, you might struggle with the lines and you might forget parts of the scene. But the more you rehearse, the more fluid and automatic those lines seem to come. And eventually, if you do this enough, like you're performing the same script night after night after night, it's not even something you have to think about. It's just simply like a part of you now. Same thing happens with our behaviors and our thoughts and our perceptions. So over the years, we are rehearsing certain reactions to situations, and those rehearsed behaviors start to feel automatic. So whether we're responding to stress, say by overeating or shutting down emotionally in conflict, or always expecting disappointment or rejection, these patterns can get really ingrained in us over time. But here's the important part. Just because we've rehearsed something doesn't mean it's the only script available to us. So, for example, let's just say you have a history of attracting unhealthy partnerships or relationships. So maybe you find yourself always drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable. And it feels like no matter what you do, no matter what you try, you end up in the same situation. And so it's easy to think that this is just how things are for you, that you are totally cursed when it comes to love. But in reality, what may be happening is that you've rehearsed certain beliefs about yourself and about relationships, like, I don't deserve better. This is the kind of love I'm destined for. Now, you may want the total opposite. And remember, want is totally different to the reality of what is happening, especially when you don't want what is happening. It could be that you are struggling with your worthiness, like no one will ever see my true worth. These behaviors are driving our choices, and these beliefs are driving our behaviors as well. So let's say you're in your 30s, you end up in a relationship where you don't feel seen or you feel undervalued. And you might believe on some level that love is supposed to be really hard, or that you need to fix the other person to feel validated, or you constantly need to be fixing yourself or appearing in a certain way. And so what you're doing is you unconsciously keep choosing partners who mirror this belief back to you. Remember, we're a vibrational universe. So our magnetism is what we draw to us, and our magnetism is what we create on the inside. It's what we believe about ourselves. It is our rehearsed subconscious experience. But here is the good news. Awareness is the very first step to breaking this cycle. Like simply recognizing this pattern and that you have this feeling of some type of curse can be so liberating because you're not doomed. You're just rehearsed. I love the saying that our brain or our subconscious will constantly pick a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. And I don't know who said it. I wish I could credit them with that because it's so true. And that's why we feel cursed, because we're constantly looking for what we know. Remember, the reality that we experienced is so individualized. We are looking for, our brain is looking for patterns. That is why we keep rehearsing the same behavior, because the brain is a pattern seeking machine. It loves repetition and autopilot. It loves to learn something and chuck it in the subconscious so it can feel safe and so it can feel reassured at what's going to happen, but also so it doesn't have to function. Like if I know something on autopilot, if I know something subconsciously, then every time I do it, I don't have to use all the energy in my brain, which is a lot of energy when we're learning something new, and apply it. So like when you get in the car, you don't have to think about, right, my foot goes on the brake, I need to shift the gear or whatever it is. You just automatically do this. So the patterns we're repeating, even if they are not helping us, they're familiar. And familiarity breeds comfort and safety to the brain and the subconscious, no matter how toxic perhaps or limiting these patterns of behavior and choices may be. This is why it can feel a little bit difficult to break out of old patterns, because every time you think and feel and act and respond and react, all the things in a certain way, you're reinforcing that neural pathway where the brain connects in your brain. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes to do it again. It's like driving down the same road over and over again. The more you drive it, the more you understand the path and can just probably do it with your eyes closed. But what happens when you suddenly decide to take a different route? So the first time it feels really unfamiliar and maybe a bit uncomfortable, and you have to be more heightenedly aware and thinking much sharply and paying much more attention to what's going on. But if you take this route over time, you keep driving down this new road, it just becomes as automatic as the old one. And this is exactly how change happens. This is exactly how we break neural pathways in the brain and form new ones, by creating new habits, new beliefs, new ways of thinking, new ways of perceiving, and new ways of responding or reacting to familiar situations. So think about this. Think about the last time you had an argument with someone, and maybe you notice that you always get really defensive, or maybe you completely shut down, even if that's not what you really want in that moment. Remember, what we do and what we want is often very different. And this is why I'm constantly challenging really surface level manifestation practices, because we can't dupe ourselves into what we want. We have to rewire ourselves and become the response to what it is that we want. So when we do this, these actions are just rehearsed. Our brain has learnt that in this time of conflict, the safest thing to do to protect yourself is to shut down, or the safest thing to do is to get really defensive. So in that situation, what if you chose something different? So what if, instead of shutting down, you practice staying really present and expressing how you feel and listening with patience and empathy? So obviously that's the desired response, but unless we practice this, we won't be able to rewire our subconscious brain into that being our natural rehearsed state. And at first, it's going to feel obviously really awkward and unnatural, maybe even confronting or unsafe. But if we continue to practice this, then your brain will start forming those new neural pathways to reinforce the healthier way of responding to the situation that you're in. So let's get into the good stuff. So how do we change patterns? So the good news is that you don't have to wait for the argument. Like, you don't have to wait for the magical moment, like to meet the new person or to have the new influx of money in order to respond or manage it differently. You can start shifting these rehearsed behaviors right now. And so I'm going to give you some practical tips on perhaps how you can begin to explore breaking your own curses or own cycles of repetition. Now, this is what we call the work. This is why people get mentoring, because we go through it and we use lots of beautiful techniques like shadow work and inner child work and visualization. We do a lot of this. I mean, this is the basis of the moon membership. We are doing this stuff every single new and full moon, constantly rewiring our brain and staying in authentic alignment with what it is that we want, who it is that we are, and constantly building that bridge and building up all the skills that are needed to do that. So if this is work you want to do at a deeper level, then I highly suggest you either, invest in some mentoring or something like the moon membership, where it's on tap to you and you can play with this yourself. And I do want to stress the word play, like working on yourself, breaking curses, like let's have some fun with it. Don't take it all so seriously, because life isn't. We are not perfect. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is going through this life having it all figured out and with completely healthy and secure patterns in every area of their life. Like, everyone is going through this. So if you can, for me, I align it with the cycles of the moon, keeps me on top of my self-work, because if I had to do this and keep myself accountable to it, I think I would, like anything, let it go by the wayside. But by having that moon cycle there, I'm onto it like every couple of weeks, because there's always a full moon to release and there's always a new moon to set those intentions, to see where I am in terms of that distance from what I want, but who I am being. Remember, we attract what we are, not what we want. So, first tip, like I mentioned before, is identifying the rehearsed patterns. First step to any type of evolving or becoming that better or higher version of yourself is always going to be awareness. So just simply, you need to become the greatest observer of your life. The way you live your life, and your life has to be the most addictive and fascinating movie that you are constantly watching, because you are going to start to notice the areas in your life where you do not feel cursed, and you have built up these really healthy responses and perspectives to situations and to life, and you are just repeating them over and over again. And that is why that area of your life seems relatively easy and flowing. And you're also going to start to notice where you feel stuck. Like, what situations do you find yourself repeating? And what beliefs or behaviors show up when things get a little bit tough? And my first advice in awareness is to always write it down. There is so much scientific backing to this, that what we get out via pen and paper, not by notes on your phone, might be tempting at the time, but then transfer that into a journal by actually physically as well as mentally getting that awareness onto paper is really powerful. So, for example, you notice that you may often get really overwhelmed by money problems. So ask yourself, what do I believe about money? How do I react when these financial stresses show up into my experience? And start a journaling practice where you can write about the recurring situations in your life. When you notice the patterns, how am I reacting? What's my thought process in this situation? Is this response or reaction helpful or harmful? Being mindful that your patterns can start to shift your mindset. So once we bring awareness to it, it's like shining a light in the dark room when you're feeling scared. So when you're at night and you feel scared, the room is dark, all you need to do is turn on a light and you might be able to see where that funny noise is coming from. Or you might be able to see that there is absolutely nothing there threatening you. So awareness is like turning on that light so we can start to begin to see much more clearly. Then, as we all have individual life curriculums, because we all are experiencing this world in a very individualistic way, it is up to us, and sometimes you might need the help of someone to like mirror back to you, like me or another practitioner. Once you've identified a rehearsed pattern, interpret it. This is where you get to create new habits. If your automatic reaction is to be like defensive during an argument, stop before you say anything, take a breath, pause and ask yourself, is this the way I want to respond? Is this the way I want to deal with this? And if it's not, then you need to consciously choose a different response. You need to interrupt the pattern. Like try the 5-second rule. It's so hard when your emotions are firing, but if we don't get out of the discomfort or into the discomfort, then nothing's going to change, right? So next time you feel a negative reaction coming up, count to 5. It's a small moment of pause and it's going to allow you to make a conscious choice around how to respond. Now, you may consciously choose to respond the same way. That's okay. But it will, the situations will keep presenting, or the cursed situations in inverted commas will keep presenting, because that is energetically where you're at. That is your rehearsed behavior. That is what you're aligning with. That is your magnetic field. So these things are going to keep coming up until we choose differently. And choosing differently is therefore the next step. We have to rehearse the new behavior, and this is where the true magic begins. So just like you rehearse the old pattern, you now need to rehearse the new one. And every time you make a conscious choice to choose differently, you are rewiring your brain. And it might feel really awkward at first, but that's okay. Keep practicing. And the practical tip for this is you don't need to wait for the circumstance to arise in order to do it. You can actually start to reprogram your neurological pathways in deep meditation, or once you get into that transcendental state of meditation. Again, this is something we do on the moon membership every full and new moon in the meditation. So we are actually meditating ourselves into new neurological pathways. Of course, it is then up to us to actually enact that and embody it. Absolutely. And that takes awareness, and that takes consciousness, and that takes discipline. But we've actually already started rehearsing that new behavior and forming those new neurological pathways in a meditative experience. But of course, then in practicality, we have to set small achievable steps for us to do that. So let's say like you feel cursed because you tend to overeat when you're stressed. So instead of trying to like overhaul your entire eating habits in one go, just start by practicing stress release techniques like deep breathing or going for a walk when you're feeling overwhelmed. Like interrupt the behavior, practice something different, and step by step, it's going to become more natural to you. And finally, none of this is possible. No change is possible, I do believe, without self-compassion. Sure, we can use shame and guilt and regret to propel us forward into the new, but when it's done in a deep sense of self-compassion, it's going to be much more loving on your nervous system, and it's going to be much longer lasting because it is authentic. Why? Because your authentic state is love. So love yourself into change, acknowledging that changing patterns does take time. And if you inadvertently slip up, you're judging yourself, so stop doing that. Don't beat yourself up about it. Instead, just acknowledge it and go, oh, right, I went straight back into what was rehearsed there. I'm going to now be more mindful of that, and you'll build confidence to get back on track or to choose differently. Be super compassionate with yourself through the process. Even like words of beautiful encouragement to yourself that I am in the process of change. I'm not failing, I'm changing. And these affirmations can help your mindset get into the right place. You are not cursed. You're just a little rehearsed. Every pattern, belief, and habit that you have created has been learnt over time through repetition, through conditioning, and through reinforcement. And so the beauty of this is that you can unlearn it at any moment by becoming aware, interrupting old patterns of behaviours, practicing new ones with a deep sense of love and compassion for yourselves, like breaking free from old cycles and creating a life that feels more aligned with who you truly are is so possible. Remember, the power is all in your hands. You don't have to keep repeating the same script. So next time you feel stuck, remind yourself, this is not a curse. It's a rehearsed behavior. It is a rehearsed response. It is a rehearsed perception that I can change. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. And obviously, I would love for you to comment or send me through any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them, or even any different perspectives on this. Again, I'm totally up for that as well. And share it with anyone that you might feel would benefit from this. Obviously, also remember to subscribe to the Light Path Collective newsletter, so that you can see the episodes coming up each month, so you can remember to tune in to ones that pique your interest. But in the meantime, remember, you have got this. Keep rehearsing the life you want to live, because you are not cursed. You're just rehearsed.